Eben Sadie arguably kick-started South Africa's fine wine revolution. Over 2 decades, his pursuit for quality in the Swartland has been unparalleled in South Africa, and the wines are now firmly established and highly sought after globally. Strauss Co are proud to include and present 30 curated fine wine lots from Sadie Family Wines alongside Vilafonté and Alheit Vineyards in our forthcoming October virtual live sale. With me, in a Rhône vineyard, in Aprilskloof, in the Palladius on a beautiful spring day, is the man himself, Eben Sadie. Eben, what makes this place special? What's it about it, this terroir?
First of all, it's not in the office. It's a good start. I think that, you know, the Palladius for very many years has kind of been lying dormant, waiting to transform, and it's not the biggest region in South Africa in terms of plantings, but it's the biggest in circumference. So from the vineyards on the coastal areas, you know, coming from the sea level, basically at 40 meters above sea level, all the way up into the mountains, up to the top, probably top of Piketberg, high slopes of Piketberg, Rhône Castile, the Palladius itself, vineyards at 500, 600, 800, 900 meters. You know, you've got a geological canvas, you know, of different soils and aspects and slopes, and yeah, it's just an incredible place to work and to kind of explore. And our home is here in the Palladius. This is where we've got our farm and the winery and our offices and where we're based, and everything comes here. We kind of work from here out into all the other sub-regions of the Swartland, but we're not only focused on the Palladius. We work in the Rhône Castile mountain here behind us, and Piketberg up in the northern reaches, on the coast in Skurfberg, on the beach in limestone soils, and we've got pretty much all the very many important soil types kind of wrapped up in this area. You know, we've got granite soils, slate soils, limestone soils, we've got decomposed table mount sandstone bases, we've got heavy alluvial plains. So, you know, it's a very, very good base to be at and to work from.
It's hard to believe that it's been more than 20 years, eh? I mean, since was first vintage was 2000 of Columella. I mean, it's crazy how fast it's gone, but we're also, whenever I think about Sadie wines, I realize it really is now firmly established in that shorter period of time. But I think it's probably a good time to ask that question then, because you learn in a slow way, but you do move. And you've recently told me that you are exploring other vehicles in terms of expressing this terroir that you're learning about. The signature wines, Palladius and Columella, were based in sort of a Rhône philosophy, one would say, and then maybe traditional South African varieties. Are those still the best vehicles, do you think, for the expression?
So on varietals and the Rhône, the whole Rhône kind of classification, I think people kind of like to put things in boxes because then they can tick it. So Rhône is kind of, you're now working with those grapes and you're doing that. That's maybe where I think some people just in general would have placed our initial attempts at trying to develop a orientation or style out here. But for me, it was never that. At that same time, I was living in Spain. You know, I had a lot of traveling through south of France, southern Italy. I really made a lot of time on the islands in the Mediterranean, and all of that. You know, for me, the thing is, it was Mediterranean. You know, and the Mediterranean is much bigger than just the Rhône per se. So, I think when you look at your latitude, where you're positioned on the globe, like here we're sitting now on 33.5, your altitude, your soil type, the solar radiation per square inch, the way the sun's rays penetrate the atmosphere, you know, it all has an effect on how this plant responds, how it generates energy, how it spills energy, how it takes up its food, its water, all of that. And all of that has effect. So for me, you know, when we look at this landscape and you look at the makeup of this landscape, we're much more closely related to parts of southern Greece, southern Croatia,
Italy.
Southern Italy, the island of Sicily, southern Spain, southern France. So it's a massive area, that Mediterranean. You know, it was a hugely occupied land and still is, you know, so even from the historic time. So lots of grapes have migrated in those areas. So where we initially might have started off working with Syrah and Grenache and Viognier and Marsanne and Roussanne and Mauvert and Carignan, you know, they were kind of the easy first stops, because they were at least names we could sort of pronounce. You know,
and they were certified by Salvis and so forth.
Yeah,
I mean,
and they were on the scheme and the material was available. But 18 years ago I started with a program of going globally to find material that's going to better maybe correspond with our soils. And, you know, another kind of concerning aspect is, you know, with global warming and all of that, global warming, some people still kind of pondering whether it could be true or not. I don't know, but all I know is what I've seen on the farm, and it's been getting drier, warmer. The chemistry of the wines have become much more complicated. It was much easier 20 years ago to produce wines here. I don't get the acidity now at 13.5 alcohol. I used to get at 14.5, you know. Picking earlier, still don't have the same acidities in the wine. So my numbers suggest something has changed.
And you're responding, basically.
And we're responding, and we're responding heavily.
Oh, wow.
So I've planted, with this program, we've planted on the farm, we've planted grape varieties like Agriogitico, Assyrtiko from Greece, Grillo, Catarato, Fiano, Fermentino from southern Italy, Negra Amaro, Aglianico, the Portuguese grape varieties of the south, towards the Algarve. You know, you've got grapes like Trincadeira, Tinta Amarela, Tinta Francesa. Barga is actually a cool area in Portugal, so it's not going to work here. And you need heaps of limestone soil. Okay. So you can't again look only at the climate. You need to look at the substratum. You know, there's grapes that don't move from the area, and there's a couple of grape varieties that refuse to move. So you also got to look at the adaptability of the grape. So in the world, you basically get two types of grape varieties. You get isohydric and anisohydric. And your isohydric grape varieties are just varieties that's better adapted to hydric stress, sun, heat, all of that. And for us planting all these varieties, and you can't just plant them in one site, because maybe they're doing very well in granite, but they might not do well in slate soils, or 2-3 of them do better in slate or in limestone soil. So we got to repeat these experiments
long term, hey?
And this program of R&D in very many locations to have a kind of result. And obviously the bigger you cast the net, obviously also the better chance you're going to have at success. So we've been rolling out all of this R&D across a very large area of this kind of west coast, from here, from the Swartland up even into the Olifants river area up in the north, which is next enormous region. So yeah, it's progressive work. It's very much fun. It's very costly. And we're going to make mistakes. But you know, I've been long enough in agriculture. I've made peace with mistakes. You know, this is a very humbling game. You get broken often.
Sure. Would you say if there's one thing that these varieties that you're experimenting with have in common, the way I understand it, is that you can farm them dry land, right? I mean, they're drought and heat resistant to adopt here. Yeah,
they drought and heat resistant. I'm now going to address our drought situation by opening a bottle. But yeah, the you know, when you look at the formulation of those grapes, they're gonna be much better players in the game. And we don't irrigate our vineyards, so it's a personal decision. I have friends that make wines that's even better than our wines, and they irrigate vineyards. So I don't say if you irrigate your vineyard you're making a lesser wine, or if you unirrigate it you're making a better wine. I just like the idea that once we've bottled a wine, it's a summary of the natural climatic conditions of that year. And I think if you start irrigating, I simply just don't trust myself. So I think by knowing my own nature, I'll always irrigate more than I need. When you don't irrigate, you try and find the answers from the other end. If you can open a water pipe, it's always going to be the easy first.
It's interference. Yeah.
Kind of not needing to contemplate it too much. The last 3 years of drought, there was serious times when I thought maybe we're coming to a point now where we need to roll out irrigation, but the answers they kind of reside in other things. And for me, the drought, I became very bitter about the drought because things that we care for and things that we love very much came under serious threat. Our crop levels and yields went down, up to 35% year on year. That's basically over 3 years we didn't bottle a vintage almost. It was absorbed over the drought years, but so then you start feeling a little bit different about this irrigation aspect. But
yeah, it's easier said than done.
But the droughts definitely made us better farmers. It's kind of forced us to go into that uncomfortable place of questions. You can see our cover crops. We've just rolled our cover crops flat. Our cover crop regime, our planting, the way we plant, the way we train our vines, the way we do our summer pruning, our whole agricultural year, every single aspect we had to go and review because of the drought, and we kind of pushed in a very uncomfortable place, but was maybe the best place for our winery and for our company.
Long-term
because
strategy.
we got to answers that might have taken 25 years longer to discover, and it was all condensed into 3 years.
Wow. I think we can't talk about all of these viticulture factors without talking about old vines. When we're sitting in an old vineyard, you said earlier it's around probably 40 years. Your vineyard VX that you established undoubtedly played a very large role in the whole movement of awareness for older vines out of South Africa, along with other very important players. Is that an important legacy for you, and is it part of the long-term strategy still, the old vines?
For me, just at that stage, I've had the privilege to have spent a lot of time in Europe amongst the greatest wines on this planet, and you repetitively see the greater wines made out of old vineyards. That doesn't mean I just said you can't make good wines from young vineyards, because again, people always want to compare old vines versus young vines. It's not the dialogue. It's like saying in mankind, only 45-year-olds are interesting. So if you don't have young people, how long is that going to be interesting? So
only young people can serve big waves.
Yeah, well, there is a factor. Yeah, but you can't have the one without the other. I mean, we're sitting here. This is an old vine. That's an old vine. That's an old vine. You'll see now the fourth vine here is a young vine that's 2 years old. For me, a vineyard is like a society. You have the birth of some and you have the death of others, and in between you must have all of it. I like a vineyard that's got all the ages in it, and if it can get an average age of 35, 40, I think you've got something pretty remarkable as a base. You've got an educated environment. The vines have built up memory, they've built up resources. When you look at these vines with the thick arms, those arms are full of starch, which is natural reserves. When you've got a young vine that's 2 years old, it doesn't have that reserve. It's like, well, unless you're a trust fund kid, but normally at 21 you don't have a lot of reserves. So, you build up reserves. Usually by the time you get to 45, you start buying yourself a nice boat, and or you buy that house that you've always hoped to buy, or at 45 you enter, for some people they don't ever want to acquire anything, that's also fine, but you need time, and for the young vine it needs time to build that structure, to build that very advanced root system. So young vines, very important, but old vines are great, but you won't have the one without the other. And
sure,
I think
of course,
for me it's just a progressive program of interplanting. You can't farm a gap in the vineyard, because you're going to consume diesel, you're going to consume spraying, you're going to plow that land, and why do you want to plow a gap? You know, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
It's also not good for the books.
Of course. Talking of time, I mean, that's something that I don't think I've ever heard you talk about your wines or about anything, unless you're joking, without using time in your narrative. So, thank you. So,
cheers. There you go.
Cheers, Eben.
Yeah, hopefully it's not corked.
Nice to sit here in the vineyard in spring. Eh?
Yeah.
The concept of time is very, very important to you. You don't make changes lightly, and once you do, you give the change enough time to show its hand. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a highlight for me in the upcoming auction is the 2010 Columella. I just love that wine. I have some of it in the cellar, and I drink every now and then. But it was almost for me a sign of the time when you changed a little bit to a lighter, more perfumed, more elegant style. And then more recently, maybe you've introduced a change or two again. So is it fair to say that you give a change about 10 years? Is that?
So you go on time. Yeah, I think you gotta, time is such an important aspect, and you gotta, when I was 24 years ago, which was an awful long time ago, you're very young, you're ambitious, you're driven, you've got more testosterone maybe than you can handle. You're like a beefed up car with a massive engine, but you don't have the braking system, And we all know how that ends. That's usually, it ends up in the bin. And what happened when I was 24, 25, 26, you do too many things. You try and change the world all at once. And you have so many trials running and everything, but then in the end, the resultant wine, you can't actually read it because there's too many angles and too many permutations on
too many variables.
Change. And the variables are exponential, and you actually can't distill it down to one thing. And that's why when I started, I was a couple of years into wine. When we started the Columella, I said, let's move slow. And one or two of my mentors in Europe that I spend a lot of time with said to me, even you're like a rabbit. You're like a rabbit on acid. Just take it easy. And so I've implemented at a very early stage this decade philosophy. When you make few changes, choose them carefully, because you only be allowed one or two, maybe three, and produce the wine over a period of 10 years, and let those changes be pressure tested. I mean, you get a watch that's it says 250 meters. You can print it on the watch, but it doesn't mean it's going to keep ticking when you bring it up from. Take it down to 250 meters.
And see.
In cold water, in warm water, take it on a semi-flat battery, on a full battery. Take it across everything. And that's what we've done with our wines, So the Columella, like from 2000 to 2009, was kind of in one interpretation. It was a point of departure. I think it was actual with the time. The wines were kind of casted on very heavy foundations.
Yeah. You still use small barrels as well.
Up.
You still use smaller barrels at the time. New oak.
A lot of small oak. 24 months in small oak, Pijage, punching down the caps, going to bigger volumes of extraction. I drink those wines today, and sometimes when I drink them, I think maybe we had it right then. Whenever you open a good bottle, you like.
They keep well.
Maybe we're getting too sophisticated now. But I think those wines were definitely built up more. They were a bit more muscly of nature. And then by 2010, the world paradigm has shifted. We were coming back off like this very build-up wines, and we, at the same time with global warming, we introduced a lot of grape varieties that ripened earlier, lower alcohol levels, brighter red fruit characteristics, higher level tones of acidity, lower natural pHs, and all of that helped that we could, I think the wines became more elegant, they became leaner, they became fresher, but they need now more time. Because what happened is, if you pick a fruit, if you buy a guava or orange and it's quite ripe, you're going to have to eat it pretty soon.
Yeah.
Or banana. And then if you buy it greener, you have more time. And I would say that we're definitely working with earlier fruit now. So our wines where they would have been like very pleasant 5 years, you got to wait now for 10, 12 years. So you need to give our wines time, because that's what they need. And now people will ask you, but why do you want to produce a wine? For me, it's always been the fascination. You know, I open a bottle of Brunello de Montalcino that's 45 years old, and you open it and it's younger, it's 40 years old or 50 years old. The wine is so alive. It's actually still throwing a punch, and it's still got tension and fiber in it. And now you sit with this wine and you're like, yeah, how did they do this? You know, how could this wine be so almost immortalized? You know, what did they do to give that wine that life? And then maybe you're in Piedmont and you open a Piedmontese wine and you relive it, and you can relive it with some Bordeaux wines and some wines from the Mosel. And you know, the biggest misperception out there is that white wine can't age. You know? That's my neighbor going. So you have white wine, and this whole idea that white wine can't age. You know, if you open an old German Mosel Riesling Spätlese Trocken, you know, that thing,
they just keep going.
That wine can go for 40, 50, 60 years. Or wine from Vouvray in the Loire, or from Savigny, you know, well made in the year where all things come together. And so our whole shift's been to lock up time.
Okay. And
we did the same for Columella and Palladius, and kind of that philosophy spilled over into the Old Vine series as well, with the 8 bottlings of single vineyards. To go slower. If you want to make changes, do you know where you make them? You make them here in the vineyard. Make them in the vineyard and do the least number of changes in the winery, so that you can read the changes you make in the vineyard. Yeah. You can imagine if you make too many changes in the cellar and in the vineyard, you're actually not going to know what was the true contributing factors to your quality rise. Sure.
I think, just in fairness, because I have recently tasted your early vintages, and yes, they were bigger, but they also just aged so well. We quite excited to include a 12-bottle vertical of the Columella from the maiden 2000 all the way to 2011. I don't think that's been sold ever on auction, not on a commercial auction like this. So it's a lot that we think will be exciting with the bidders. Eben, I think fair to say that you're in good company for this sale. Vilafonté and Alheit, have you got some stalkies to share?
Too many, but we don't want to scare people. But I think Mike and Chris, you know, they, as characters, they may be very, very questionable, but on their wines, they're very, very solid. You know, Mike Ratcliffe and Zelma and Phil, they from the outset with Vilafonté, a very solid interpretation. You know, they had a core vision. It was the cab, the C and the M for the Merlot. They had the farm Vilafonté, very, very heavy soils, those are big soils. So their source of fruit was locked up, and there's been consistency along, and there's been improvements in the wines. I can follow the dialogue, I can follow the trajectory going into those wines. And then Chris Alheit, you know, started a little bit later, but Chris started with a very focused, very heavy white wines from old vines, having gone to very many areas. And his consistency, and Chris is also the kind of guy that you will easily not bottle a vintage. You know, if it's not spot on what he thinks it's got to be, he won't compromise. It will just not be bottled. So, you know, now I think, for me, what we've been doing, it's always been a case of consistency, and chasing consistency. I think anybody can make on and off a given good wine. Sorry about the noise, but this is my neighbor.
Working farm.
My neighbor never works in his vineyard, but obviously
today,
so he will. But no, I think when it comes down to consistency, that's where you measure great producers. You know, somebody that, irrespective of the change of climate, irrespective of the personal drive, the soils, all that can hold that whole terroir together. And it doesn't mean that your wine's every year got to be the same wine, because that will be utterly boring. But I think somebody that can hold a consistency throughout, that's for me That's for me gold in any producer. And you know, if I look at the producers in the world that I buy, it's definitely the consistent ones, and the ones that I will spend on quite a bit of money. You know, it's people that I know they're good for the buck.
I suppose that's fine wine, eh?
Yeah.
You're basically focus and with personality and a story, and doing that consistently.
Yeah, the personality is very important. You can't, if you chip off the ear of personality, if it becomes this produced recipe kind of thing, I think you're going to hit that flat line again. It will be boring, you know.
Yeah.
For me, the worst thing is if before I open a great bottle of wine, if I already know what it's going to taste like. It should be a surprise.
Yes.
It must be great, but it should reveal new things to me.
Actually, that's the other factor, is then showing a sense of place.
Yeah.
So all of these 30 lots from Sadie Family, along with 30 from each of the other two producers, so 90 lots going on sale on our virtual live, the Strauss Co Fine Wine Auction virtual live sale, 10th of October. It's a Sunday. It all happens online, so you can join on the Strauss Co website, register, participate, view from the comfort of your home. We hope to see you then. Cheers.
Cheers. Wine's still cool. You can watch Formula One and bid with popcorn.
There we go.
That's what I'll do.